Even with Christians, there's this mentality that they can send their kids to a pagan school for 35 hours a week and take their kids to church, 2 or 3 times, and they'll be okay. And the statistics just show that's not an accurate statement. 70% or more of kids who grow up in the church and go to public school end up walking away from the church. And so for us, it's really convincing Christians not to send their kids to the humanist church for their education.
This is Virtuous Leaders, the podcast for based Catholic schools. Speak truth, do good, or die trying. Here's the show. So Robert Bortins, you're the head of the world's largest classical homeschooling organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my mom founded Classical Conversations in 1997 in our basement. She had discovered classical education. She had been homeschooling us, and she knew she needed, other peers to do things like debate and do things like mock trial and, not just be debating and talking at her or with her about these subjects, but have a group of peers to be able to have these kind of rhetorical discussions. And so Classical Conversation was formed in our basement. We started having more people wanting to join us. I've got 3 younger brothers, so more families joined. And basically, Classical Conversations is a homeschool community that you join where once a week during the academic year, you get together with other parents and a trained tutor. You're going over the subject matter and practicing it, kind of demonstrating it while you're in the room together. But in the younger years, when we're studying grammar stage, which is basically memorizing copious amounts of information about all the different subjects until they go to the logic stage in middle school and rhetoric stage in high school, and studying things like one of the things they do our senior year is translate the Iliad from Latin into English, doing things like mock trial, dissections, art projects, all sorts of different things that you need a group to do. And so homeschooling isn't just about leaving school, but also embracing a whole different sort of paradigm.
It sounds like you follow the classical trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, arranged chronologically. I think that was recommended by, was it Dorothy Sayers, Lost Arts of Learning?
Yeah, so Dorothy Sayers kind of has a great essay where she kind of codified that idea in many of our minds, and then just going back and even now studying, Plato and Aristotle and the things that they did. So we have a number of homeschooling moms now at this point. We have 170 employees at Classical Conversations. We help families homeschool in 60 countries. So we have some of the best and brightest homeschool moms that have been through our program that are going through and trying to find those lost tools and give new homeschoolers and veteran homeschoolers alike a pathway to give their kids a great education. I mean, homeschooling works anyways, but when you understand why it works and the tools that can make it work better, you can get a whole lot more out of that experience.
How many students have y'all impacted?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I don't know if it's 1 million students yet, but hundreds of thousands of students over the years. I mean, we've had right now, like this past year, we had about over 3,000 graduate from our program. This year, we have 45,000 families, which equate to about 130,000 students just this academic year alone. So, obviously many of those students stay for another year and stuff like that. So individual students, I'm not sure of, but over the last, decade, we've seen well over a million students come through our program.
Impressive. So what motivates you to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think just my love of the Lord and understanding of what the Bible says is our really responsibility as parents. He gives children to us. I was homeschooled through high school. I really enjoyed it. I saw the benefits. And so I wanted to be able to give back and encourage parents that if my family can do it, yours can do it too. And it's really just, it's a different way of living, just this idea of, we're not trying to do school at home, but we're trying to raise the next set of leaders in the kingdom of God. We're trying to raise virtuous adults. And so it's just a totally different way of raising your children. And it's beautiful. It works so well. I have 3 kids of my own. And, I want them to live in a peaceful world that obeys God's laws and commandments. And so we're really on the front line of helping other parents do the exact same thing on a day-to-day basis.
What would you say is the difference, or how does homeschooling lead to raising virtuous citizens versus other forms of schooling?
Well, first of all, you kind of as a parent know that you're going to be with these kids for at least 18 years. And They're gonna have your grandchildren, and they're gonna be taking care of you when you're older, so there's a little bit different motivation to make sure that your kids are honest, respect others than a person in a school setting or their private or public school who are being paid to be there and most likely won't see your kid again after their, 8 or 9 months that they are together, or maybe they're just together for a semester, and so, yeah, they want to try to do the best they can, but, my wife, she was a public school teacher for 10 years. She saw nearly 300 kids a year, and so, as much as she wanted to be a positive impact on all 300, that's just humanly impossible, so they get raised by each other in those types of settings where, you're with those same 30 kids every single year, and different adults come and go out of your life, but you can count on your friends being there, and that's why we see cliques. That's why we see these different behaviors because they're modeling after each other instead of modeling after adults who want them to grow up in a certain manner. So it's a fundamentally different way of, just looking at children.
Yeah. Hey, what are the biggest challenges you've faced on this journey?
Well, I think all of us want to give our responsibilities away to someone else, right? It's stressful or it's hard to be like, okay, I'm responsible for these young ones when the state will say, no, just give them to us for free. We'll pick them up on a yellow school bus. We'll feed them at lunch. You don't have to worry about it. We have the experts and we're going to tax you for it anyway. So just give them to us. And so even with Christians, there's this mentality that they can send their kids to a pagan school for, 35 hours a week and take their kids to church, 2 or 3 times and they'll be okay. The statistics just show that's not an accurate statement. 70% or more of kids who grow up in the church and go to public school end up walking away from the church. And so, for us, it's really convincing Christians not to send their kids to the humanist church for their education.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem kind of like a doctrination in secular humanism, and if that's whether that's the intended purpose or not, it's very successful in it. And some would argue that that is the purpose of it historically, the way it's
Yeah,
developed.
no, absolutely. I mean, you can have good people in the system, but the system is always going to take power upon itself. I mean, just look at, you can put a bunch of time, money, and effort into school board races, but once the people get elected in there, they can be good people, and they just find that the bureaucratic system has just basically, enacted all power into itself, and you're just a kind of a lifeless figurehead there to take the body blows of public opinion while the system does.
What have you observed that?
Yeah, I mean, I have friends that are in different school boards and they can't get anything done, or they're always in some sort of bureaucratic minutia. I've talked to people who are 60, 70 years old who've spent their life flipping school boards from blue to red, and they realized that it was almost just a complete waste of time, that they didn't build anything sustainable, that it was just shifting sands of the culture. And yeah, I'm not saying abandon those types of roles, but that's not building for the future. That's just putting balm on a burn and trying to make the patient, less miserable. We need to get a system together and get our kids out of that altogether.
So you have a noble mission. You're forming virtuous citizens with the love of the parents within a high level of education, the classical trivium, which I can see the fruits of in your ability to speak, and just even in this interview. So I suppose that you've been met by just open, welcoming arms by government officials because wouldn't they want this for their citizens?
Yeah, I mean, we try not to engage too much with the civil government any more than we have to, because we really believe that the role is of the parents and the family, that God didn't design the civil government to be in charge of education. I mean, governors like Ron DeSantis have gone all in on classical education. I mean, we're glad to see that more and more people are coming around to this concept, this philosophy that's worked for over 2,000 years, and abandoning the modern paradigm that is doing so much damage to our kids. But ultimately, I mean, the vendors, places like Pearson, billion-dollar for-profit companies, they're not trying to change their curriculum to go classical. The ACT and SAT is not trying to change their curriculum. So more and more Christians are seeing that classical education is the way forward, is a way to create thinkers and people who can defend their faith and, explain it to other people. And so more and more colleges, Christian colleges now are embracing classical education or trying to figure out how to get classically educated students. into their classroom. So there is a movement, a fundamental, I think, sentiment among at least the right at this point of the country, or the conservatives, to embrace more of a classical education. But as C.S. Lewis put it, basically an education without Christ as the center just makes a smarter devil. And so,
Mhm.
Christian part of it to me is one of the major parts of it, and not having those two things be separate.
You're not the first homeschool advocate I've had on this show. One question I haven't asked yet is, do you think there's any good school alternative to homeschooling?
Well, there's better ways to do schooling than that are being done, but homeschooling for me, it's the natural way of doing things. If you go look at nature and nature's God and how they designed the world to act, it's for parents, loving parents to raise their kids. I was with Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, and he was revealing, I was at an event where he was revealing the first AI component to their math, Khan Maths, that's online, the Khan Academy. And he's on stage and he's saying, it would be great if, every kid had someone who loved them, and, it was like a one-on-one mentorship, tutor relationship. But, I just don't know how you could do that. And so we need stuff like AI to, I was like, I turned, my wife was there with me. I was like, if only God had thought about that. So, I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, even if you're not a Christian, I mean, you could look at the design of just like animals and stuff like that. I mean, they're raised by their parents, 99% of them. I mean, you have some different groups or animals that might, do certain things in a group setting, but it's primarily parents raising their offspring. And so, there's ways to do, private school where the parents are involved that more closely resemble homeschooling, and I think those are gonna turn out better. But the farther that the parents are removed from education, the harder it's gonna be. And a lot of these systems, they'll give lip service. Even like Arnie Duncan, who was Secretary of Department of Education under Barack Obama, said that parents are child's first and best teachers, and we need to recognize that. But then they put in all these different systems, and the Republicans do it too, that separate children from their parents and the educational responsibilities. So, it would be possible having parents in the classroom, parents helping out, those type of things that could keep the parents involved and would make the education more closely resemble a homeschooling. But there's very few examples of that.
Are there any particular policies or legislation, executive actions people should be looking for, or hoping for, advocating for to further your vision of education?
Well, I think, from the federal level, I know people are excited about the Department of Education being cut by Donald Trump. But if we keep all the same Common Core or Every Child Succeeds Act or all those acts from the federal government, then, that's really not, that's just changing the, window dressing on the Titanic. You got to get rid of those laws altogether. And then just the mandatory education laws in each of the states that requires you to go to school or go to jail. Basically, we need to get those out of there, because it's just, I mean, a lot more people are recognizing that public education is just really, 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 really expensive babysitting. But a
Yeah.
lot of that is, you're forced to attend some sort of educational institution or school, whether you want to be there or not, or whether you tend to be a disruptive, or if you want to be someone who's actually learning. And so a lot of these laws just are pointless. So I'd like to see those get removed or lessened. So, I hear all the time people say stuff like, "Well, my grandma only had an eighth grade education," or so and so, ancestors only were allowed to go to school through eighth grade. I was like, "Have you ever seen those eighth grade tests?"
Yeah.
Like, you would need like a master's degree. Probably can't pass those tests. Your grandma with an eighth grade education is smarter than, all these people with, feminist master's degrees. So ultimately, we need free people to educate themselves. And so any laws that restrict, people getting together for educational purposes, creating red tape around those need to go.
Yeah, man. You're speaking the truth. So what's your vision for expanding this, and what can people do to help?
Yeah, classical conversations, our vision is to, free families and to help them to understand what their God-given responsibilities are. And so One of the things you can do is just join a local community, classicalconversations.com, to find out information. If you'd like to lead a local group, we'll teach you how the tools of classical learning and how to, create a community yourself if you're not owned, but if you're part of a church and you want to expand your ministry to homeschoolers, hosting a local classical conversations community is a great way to do that. We have a partnership with HSLDA. They have a foundation for families who can't afford to homeschool that offers grants and different things. So if you're a donor, say go over to HSLDA's Compassion Fund and give them a donation so that they can help more people homeschool who want to, but just are, in a financial strait at the moment. So there's plenty of ways everyone can get involved in at classical conversations and helping people homeschool.
Well, Robert, keep forming tomorrow's virtuous citizens.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. See you next time.